Was there anything that you needed to unlearn when you came into the private sector?
If you're a purely private company, the only thing that really regulates your data security is privacy laws, which are not super directive on how to do something. Everything in cybersecurity is amazing. We're all awesome. And to me, the reality was that's not what I'm seeing.
Joshua Copeland is a cybersecurity executive, professor, and board advisor with over 25 years on the front lines of federal, state, and enterprise security. He cuts through fear and industry dogma to build resilient systems and fearless teams.
A lot of folks look at compliance as your end goal. If we're compliant, we're good. Compliance should be your minimum baseline, your starting line, not your finish line.
What do you tell students about the gap between what they're learning with what the job actually looks like?
The biggest lie that our industry tells ourselves is that the new tool will fix all of our problems. Talk to the business people in your organization. Find out what their pain points are. By doing so, you become their trusted ally instead of the Department of No.
Welcome to Automate or Die Trying. I'm Wil Ramos, and today I'm joined with Joshua Copeland. Joshua is a CISO at Crescendo, Deputy Commander of the Louisiana State Cyber Reserve, State Guard Cyber Reserve, Professor at Tulane, and also the voice behind the hashtag Unpopular Opinion movement in cybersecurity. Josh has spent 25 years building and leading security programs across federal, state, and commercial sectors. He runs SOCs, scaled GRC functions, led enterprise security at companies like Bose, and now he's building a security program at Crescendo. But here's what makes this conversation interesting. Joshua is known for challenging the conventional wisdom in our industry. He calls himself the unpopular opinion guy, and he's built a following burning down what he calls the bullshit that holds security back. Joshua, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Will.
Yeah, it should be an interesting conversation. So, Joshua, for folks who don't know Crescendo, kind of give us a 30,000 foot view, like a quick snapshot, what you're responsible for and what scales are you operating at?
So Crescendo as a whole is a customer experience platform. So all the things that you think of customer interaction, whether that's through a AI agent or through human agents, our company provides that as a third-party service. So with that, as the person in charge of cybersecurity for that organization, that's a whole lot of stuff, not only the AI platforms that we use, but the people process side. And that's dealing with all of our customers' data. So HIPAA, customer PCI, all of those pieces and parts that are critical to their operations that we help enable and protecting all of that. So scale-wise, massive organization, we have 3,500 people globally, multiple locations throughout the globe, supporting dozens and dozens of really top-tier organizations. So it's a huge challenge and one that I'm thoroughly enjoying.
Nice. So you've had a path that most security leaders don't, right? You're starting at the Air Force Communications, moving through SOC operations, enterprise security, and now you're also teaching the next generation at Tulane. So how did that journey shape how you think about security today?
Really, it was kind of a thing. I fell into cybersecurity. It wasn't, what I initially joined the service for. And it was one of the things, looking at it from that different lens of, how can this go horribly, horribly wrong? One of my jobs when I was in the Air Force was dealing with nuclear weapons cybersecurity. And that's a zero fail mission. So understanding that there are consequences to not doing cybersecurity right became kind of top of mind to me. And how can we do those things better, faster, stronger, more secure, and at scale became kind of the mantra that I needed to bring forth to every organization I joined.
So during that journey, what translated directly and was there anything that you needed to unlearn when you came into the private sector from the military?
I think the biggest thing coming from or to the private sector from the military is under the DoD federal rules, there are all these regulations say you must do this thing or else, because there's a law that says you have to do that. when you go into private industry, large corporations, the level of regulation around it dramatically decreases. If you're a publicly traded company, you still have things like SOCs, and you're regulated by the FCC, SEC. If you're a purely private company, the only thing that really regulates your data security is privacy laws, which are not super directive on how to do something. And a lot of times you have organizations that go, well, I'll just buy, cybersecurity insurance, or I'll buy, this thing, and that meets my minimum level of criteria that I need to say I've done due diligence. So really learning how to explain that cybersecurity is not, just a cost center that you have to pay for, but it's something that can truly be a differentiator and something that can become a sales generation tool to your organization, has been kind of like that big shift, going from you have to do it because I have this big stick that says you have to no, you really need to do this, and here's where you're going to gain revenue by doing this.
Yeah. Okay. Now you've built and ran SOCs across multiple organizations, right? Like AT&T, Bose, and now Crescendo. Was there a moment early on where you saw how SOCs should work versus how they usually do, especially with the introduction of AI?
I think the big thing was just understanding that no two SOCs are ever going to be exactly the same, because the environments that they're in are going to be usually very unique. So bringing tools and automation in is how you really get great scale and advantage, because to be very honest, a SOC is a very, very expensive investment for any organization. Even if you're using some bare minimum tooling, the minimum headcount you're talking to bring it into your own organization is $500,000 a year.
Yeah.
That's a huge sum of money to invest in something. So to do that in a way that allows you the most value out of it and scale requires you to be very concerned on what am I looking at? Why am I looking at it? And how do I build that to where I can scale it, where I don't need to keep adding headcount to my organization to keep up with our organization's growth. So with that, automation and AI are great tools, using AI for data enrichment, going through those things that I would have a tier one that is just going to be looking at, is this a false positive or a true positive, and escalate that up to somebody else. Those are things that I can absolutely use automation and AI and enrichment tools to really make that less human intensive. And by doing that, I'm freeing up my real humans for the stuff that truly matters, and the things that are actually going to be impacts to the security of the organization.
Okay. And we'll deep dive a little bit into that and a little further into the podcast. But for now, I'd like to kind of talk about your Unpopular Opinion brands. So, that didn't come from nowhere, right? So what was the breaking point that made you start pushing back publicly on how the industry operates?
A few years ago, I kind of got tired of what I call the self-licking ice cream cone that was linked in, saying everything in cybersecurity is amazing. We're all awesome. We're doing, the great stuff and everything's perfect. And to me, the reality was that's not what I'm seeing. When I talk to my peers, that's not what I'm hearing.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of did the break out of the mold and do something that was a little bit different and go, no, really, here are the things that are broken. Here are the things that, we need to talk about. Now, you may agree with me or you may not agree with me, and that's fine. In fact, I welcome people not to agree with me, because that generates conversation.
Absolutely.
And that's truly what we need, because we need to talk about these things and not just make the assumption that everything's great. And, if we just go out and buy the latest shiny new object that has been touted at RSA or Black Hat, that everything's going to be fine, when I can stand in front of an audience of 1,000 people and ask, how many of you are 100% confident that your CMDB is 100% accurate and every asset that's in your environment? And I get 0 hands raised.
Yeah, needle drop right there.
But
you don't go from CISO of 0 to 60 in to CISO, right? So have you always had that mindset, like, that contrarian mindset when it comes to cybersecurity? And I guess at some point you started actually being vocal about it, but did you always have those thoughts in your mind?
I would wager so. Very early in my military career, my one commander sent me to assertiveness training.
Hmm.
Um, Unlike most people, I was not sent there to become more assertive. I was sent there to become less assertive, to be the appropriate level of assertive, because I was
Yeah.
a very young airman, and I knew I was right, and I had all the regulations that said I was right, but maybe didn't handle things the best way. The commander I had at the time, he was Major John Lepore, now is a retired full colonel, identified that it wasn't necessarily a bad thing, but it was something I needed to refine the skill a little bit,
Right.
and got me into the right place to where I could take what I need to do and have that contrarian viewpoint, but do so in a way that actually builds onto what we're doing.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Did part of that assertive training include an Article 15 by chance?
It did not. I
Okay.
fortunately got through my career with no Article 15s.
Nice, nice, nice. So let's go back to the SOCs, right? You've stood up and led like SOCs in a multi-tenant environments, managed like 24/7 operations, dealt with the reality of alert fatigue and analyst burnout. So what separates a SOC that actually catches things from the ones just checking the box for compliance purposes?
I really think it's down to your threat intelligence, your threat hunting, and your processes and procedures. Are you looking at your metrics the right way?
Yeah.
A lot of organizations are very metric driven, and in a way that they're doing it for compliance purposes, not to actually make the tooling or the personnel better. So I'll give you an example. A lot of SOCs have a mean time to action an alert. So
Yep.
when an alert comes in, it has to be looked at and have something done to it within a specific period of time. And that's generally considered a good measure,
Mhm.
because alert fired, and if you don't look at it for another 10 hours, that's 10 hours that somebody's potentially in your environment. Now, those are ways to look at that and go, well, if it's down to 10 minutes, that's great. They only have 10 minutes dwell time. But you have to look deeper than that. Are they just going in and opening the alert, actioning it, and then setting it off to the side and working it,
Yeah.
4 hours, 5 hours, 3 days later?
Mhm.
Or are they actually getting those alerts put in? And is there a quality to that actually matters?
Right.
So you have to kind of look at what metrics you're measuring, because we all know that whatever you measure is what is going to get improved and get worked on. So measure appropriately. If I'm going to measure how long it takes me to action a alert, I need to qualify what actioning an alert is. It's got to be more than I open the ticket up in
Yeah.
whatever my tool is, whether it's ServiceNow or Jira or within the SIM platform itself. It's got to be, you've done actual work, and how you measure that truly generates the difference between really good high performing SOCs that actually do real security,
Mhm.
and the ones who are checking a box that, a auditor will go, do you have a SOC? And people who are looking at alerts, yes, they are.
So that's kind of a trade-off, right? Like what's the hardest trade-off that you've had between the speed of the response and the thoroughness of the actual investigation within a SOC?
And to your point, that is a huge trade-off. So it's
Yeah.
how well do you know the environment, and how well do you tune your alerts? So how much noise are you introducing into the environment that's creating, all these false positives? If you just turn on an alert and just let it keep firing, and someone has to go through and investigate every single time it fires, and those fires are largely false positives, and you've done nothing to kind of reduce that noise factor, you're going to have, maybe a really quick escalation time, but you're also not measuring what's important to your organization. So that tuning piece becomes super critical to know, finding that fine line between, I've tuned it enough that I'm not getting all the noise, but I haven't tuned it so much that you're missing actual events. And that's kind of the art more than the science of, being a SOC analyst and
Yeah.
doing actual content within your SIM.
Now, where do you see those security leaders optimizing for optics instead of outcomes when it comes to the SOCs?
Really, it comes down to when you have contracts and when you are trying to focus on compliance rather than security. A lot of folks look at compliance as your end goal. If we're compliant, we're good. And I think anybody who's been in the industry long enough will agree that compliance should be your minimum baseline, your starting line, not your finish line. Because ultimately the way compliance works is it's through committee. It takes time to generate these standards for compliance. So if you're going to do an update to, say, NIST 853 or the CIS benchmarks, that's going to take anywhere from 1 to 5 years for that to update. Now, does that match with our evolving threat landscape where we have, upwards of 100 new CVEs a day? No, it doesn't. It's never going to be equal to that. So we have to kind of look at what's your threat tolerance, what's your threat vector, kind of where are you on the grand scale of things? Am I a small mom and pop business that has, just a PCI, credit card system doing some inventory? Am I a small business that's part of the defense industrial base where I'm not a prime, I'm not even a sub of a prime, but I'm a sub of a sub, where maybe I'm now a target to get into, the GDITs or the, Lockheed Martins or the Raytheons through that kind of method. So kind of understanding where you fit in the big ecosystem helps drive where you need to put the most kind of finger on the scale type of environment.
Okay. Now, I know you teach at Tulane, right? And you teach graduate students who are entering this field. Is there anything that you have to teach that they may have picked up during like a certification or conventional training that don't quite match a real world scenario?
I think that the biggest thing is that they believe, based off of a lot of boot camps and certifications out there, that everything's going to fall within the documentation and playbook that your organization has built out.
Right.
And having done this for a long time, and just the military in general will tell you the plan is great and is awesome until first contact, and then the plan goes out the window. What I think is really awesome with playbooks is they help you build a understandable and repeatable process. But what you have to be able to do is be adaptive to that. Understanding that a playbook is really kind of a skeleton that you're going to build off of, not this is the only way we can do this. Because what are you going to do when you're going through the checklist and step 3 doesn't match what you're seeing in the environment? You're going to pause and do nothing, or you're going to have to figure out, where do I go from here? So absolutely build playbooks, but also train on how you're going to be able to go off script when that happens, because that's probably what's going to happen when something bad occurs. It's not going to be something that you've ran into before. It's not something that you're going to have a playbook built around. It's going to be something that is new and might not have been well documented by anybody else.
Now, do you think, is there like a widely accepted best practice that you think may actively make an organization less secure?
Honestly, I think certifications are a best practice that typically make organizations less secure. And I'll quantify that a little bit, because I will be, full transparency. I have like 90 certifications. I don't think certifications are inherently bad. I think how we use certifications is bad.
Absolutely.
We use them as, easy button points for HR and recruiting folks to go, we're looking for somebody for this role, and if they don't have this certification, we're going to, pull them out of the list of possible candidates, because it's really, really easy to filter through applications using things like certifications and degrees that might not really tell you the whole story. I had somebody that had interviewed for me for a SOC role as a tier 2 SOC analyst that had a master's degree in information assurance with a focus on health, had CISP. And when I asked him a basic question, like, tell me about a cybersecurity regulation requirement or controls family that you know about and how it would tie back to the role that you're doing, that you're interviewing for. And I kind of got a blank stare. And it really took me back because I'm like, they've got a graduate degree. I know in information assurance, 50% of that degree is regulations, requirements, and standards. They have a CISP. 26% of that certification is those things. You have a focus of health, and you couldn't spit out HIPAA or high tech, let alone, NIST or ISO, SOC 2, any of the number of different standards like could be out there that you could have used and how that would tie back. But on paper, they were an amazing candidate, had all the right paper, but none of the right practical experience. So I think we have used and misused certifications as a tool to determine credentialing that just doesn't match with what we really need. Some of the best folks I've had in cybersecurity didn't have cybersecurity backgrounds.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I had somebody who was a marketing person who was, to this day, the best SOC analyst I've ever had work for me. And I get kind of strange looks like, what do you mean marketing? I'm like, yeah, marketing. And look at what marketing is and what the core of social engineering is. And there's like a 90% overlap of those two things because they're both about getting you to do the thing that the person wants you to do. One of the other best analysts I've ever had a degree in 18th century French literature. And I really get like the crazy eyes, like, well, what does that have to do with anything? I'm like, well, look at how they have to do their undergraduate. It's all about diving super deep into these very nuanced things, understanding the complex history, understanding context, understanding word choice and why this word matters over this word. And that's essentially what you're doing as a SOC analyst. You're taking context and seeing why this looks different, what has changed. So those are very transferable skill sets, just from a very different set of origin of how you got them. And, neither one of those people had a CISP, neither one of them had a degree in cybersecurity, but they would run laps around a lot of folks who have those credentials.
Yeah. To your point, one of my mentors, very, very, very smart guy. He actually had a humanities degree, and he's probably one of the best engineers that I know to this day. But yeah, absolutely. I think experience trumps any kind of certification or even education. To be honest, I'm that's how I came up, right, through experience. And later on, you get the certifications or whatnot, just to get your foot in the door in a lot of organizations. But you're absolutely right when it comes to that. So let me ask you this. So when you were, you're deputy commander at the Louisiana Cyber Reserve, responding to cyber incidents for state agencies and municipalities, right? You're also running commercial security. What's something you've learned from the military cyber operations that commercial orgs completely miss?
I think it's really comes down to having structured training and understanding that you need to have folks know the job above them and below them. In the commercial sector, I found a lot of, gatekeeping of knowledge as a means of job security. If I'm the only person that knows how to do this, I know my job is secure. Mm-hmm. And to a degree, that's true, but then you're also my single point of failure or success. And if something happens to you, God forbid you get hit by a bus or, you get, a bad case of COVID, how do I keep my operations going if you're the only person that knows how to do that? Additionally, how can I promote you if you're the only person that knows how to do your job?
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm put in a position where I have to keep you, but I can't get anybody else to train because you won't train them. You won't document. So for me, I start looking at you as you're a threat to my environment because you are my point of failure. You are my unpatched system, so to speak, that I need to find a way to build security around. Mm-hmm. It's why you see in banking industries where they have mandatory vacation requirements where you have to take at least 2 weeks of block vacation because it's a insider threat countermeasure going, you can hide a lot of stuff if you only take 1 day off here, 1 day off there. it's harder to hide things if you are gone for 2 weeks. It's harder for me to, or it's easier for me to understand where my points of failure are if I have folks that are gone for 2 weeks at a time and they're not there to kind of fill in. And that's a really big shift, particularly on the, commercial side, because in the military, that's what you're drilled from the time you come into your initial ascension training, that you need to know your job, you need to know the job below you need to know the job above you, because bad things happen and you need to be able to pick up the tool, pick up the rifle, pick up the keyboard, and continue on the mission. So that's a huge shift, and it's one that I found very interesting to try to work through as I get into an organization. We try to build maturity.
Yeah. Now, does teaching change the way you lead at all?
It does,
Mm-hmm.
because it's really easy to make assumptions at where people are starting from based off of what their background is, or where their certifications or their degree or whatever insert thing here. And in teaching, I've found, a lot of just wide variety of people in general. I've had folks who are PhDs in other fields taking my class to kind of robust out their ability. And, it's clearly they're smart, amazingly brilliant people in their fields, and they're struggling with basic things like, cybersecurity, posture management. How do you understand what the landscape is? And that's maybe kind of step back and go, maybe it's a thing where I have to look at, how do I build the teams? Do I look at them and say, you should have this minimum skill set to even come in the door? Or do I build pipelines where I help get you the skills where I need you to be, and kind of set minimum floors of, to come into this role, I need you to have this minimum set of skills, but I'll build you up to where I need you to be. And that's kind of that transition that's occurred, where I've looked at it and gone, are they teachable? If they're teachable, I can teach you to do the cyber thing.
Right.
I can't teach you to be teachable. I can't teach you to want to learn it. And if you have those two things, I can do a lot with you.
Absolutely. Now, what do you tell students about the gap between what they're learning with what the job actually looks like?
That's a great question, and one that I get asked a lot. And I think the answer that I give that seems rather shocking is that everything you learn in the book is always going to be foundational information. How you apply it is going to be very unique to the situation that you're in. We can look at, ITIL process and say, this is how a service desk is supposed to work. And that's in an ideal situation. Show me a situation that's ideal, and I will show you that that is what you should do. When your situation is not ideal, does not fit the textbook definition, that's when you have to start getting creative and use the art of cybersecurity more than the science of cybersecurity. Because ultimately, a lot of what we're doing is risk management. Risk is always going to be there. Risk will never be zero. We have to determine what the acceptable level of risk is for that organization. And that's going to be different in every organization that you're in, and maybe different one year to the next, even in the same organization.
Yep.
So you have to kind of continually recalibrate, okay, this is where we are today. This is where our risk levels are. This is what we think we need to do. How do we apply, this existing body of knowledge to what we're doing? What gets us to where we move the needle even a fraction of an inch closer to more secure? And kind of take those small wins and just build that fraction of an inch every day, and you'll see better gains over time instead of just focusing on big wins.
Yes, absolutely. So on that note, you wrote a piece called, from your Unpopular Opinion segment, I guess, burning down the bullshit to rebuild cybersecurity, right? That's not subtle. So what would you say is the biggest lie our industry tells itself?
think the biggest lie that our industry tells ourselves is that the new tool will fix all of our problems.
Yeah.
I think most of our problems are foundational problems that we've had since I started in the field in the late 1900s. We have poor understanding of what assets we have. We have poor understanding of identity. We have poor understanding of permissions. We have, shadow everything everywhere because we don't know all these other things. And we'll say post-COVID, we've gone into a very SaaS-based world where every device is potentially a work device.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So without having these really foundational things, everything we do is just going to be building on top of a, foundation of sand that will shift at any moment. I can have perfect security on all the things I know about, but if I don't know about these 10 other systems that somebody went out and swiped a credit card and stood up their own AWS instance that hooks into my primary system and is running this core process to our business, it doesn't matter.
Absolutely. Yeah, Bruce Schneider says security is not a tool, it's a process, right? So it's just got to follow the process. There's no one magic tool. Till this day, I still don't know a good CMDB tool, to be honest. So let's shift gears a little bit. So if you could give advice, at least one piece of advice to a CISO or security leader who's trying to move faster without breaking things, one principle they should hold on to, what would it be?
Talk to the business people in your organization. Find out what their pain points are. By doing so, you become their trusted ally instead of the department of no.
Yep.
And when you can do that, you can allow very cognizant things of bringing in things like AI tooling to do automation in ways that are safe and sane. Because if you are the department of no, they're just going to do it anyway without you and without your permission and without your input. And it's going to be a bad situation for your organization. This has been going on for decades. The example I like to give is if you go back to my early days when Microsoft Exchange allowed the ability to do file extension exemptions and blocking.
Mm-hmm.
It took all of 24 hours for folks to go, oh, I can't send a zip file. Let me change it to a .txt and just tell the other person to change it back.
Yeah.
Humans are very smart and they're very lazy. They're going to find the path of least resistance to do the thing that they need to do.
Absolutely.
If we as security professionals make their jobs so hard using the tools that we provide them, they're going to find ways around and do that a way that we don't have control over. So it's in our best interest to understand where those pain points are from the business process side and how we can find the right level of friction that gives the right amount of security without making it so hard that people go and find other ways to do that critical work. And now you have PII going everywhere and you have your IP that it's being sent out via a Google Drive that you have no control over because you're a Microsoft shop.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely talk to the business side of the folks, the folks that are doing operations, the folks who are going to be impacted by all the things that you do.
Yes. Amen to that. So Joshua, what are you building next or exploring right now that you're excited about? Whether it could be a Crescendo or, the Cyber Reserve or something else.
The thing I'm building right now that's kind of really interesting for me is building out a thought process on how to bridge between, all of these state and local government resources, as well as the federal resources to kind of look at how are we doing cyber defense for the country as a whole. The federal government has a lot of great resources. State and local governments have some resources. Ultimately, they typically don't have all the resources we wish they have. And how do we build the right level of protection for those things? Because ultimately, critical infrastructure is just that. It's critical. Power systems, water systems are the lifeblood of how we live in the United States day to day. If you take a water system out, what's interesting is water systems aren't just water, but they're also generally sewage. So that's a double problem that if you don't have a way to control that or protect it, you have massive issues with, life in general. So how do we bridge that gap between utilities that are owned by private entities, utilities that are owned by municipalities? How do we get the government to come in and do all those pieces? I've been working with a good friend of mine, Dr. Patrick Bowling, on kind of building out some framework on how we can get the right people in the right places to kind of do the right level of stuff. And I think the state guards and the states that have them is a great way to potentially do that, because you have all this great local talent that are embedded in the communities that kind of already know all these people who are doing those things. And you've already kind of built some built-in trust, and then just building up and robusting those skill sets, and the capabilities will be massively huge as we kind of grow those programs across the country.
Wow, that's good work. So where can people follow your work, read about your writing, or connect with you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Joshua Copeland. So it's /Joshua Copeland. My book, Unpopular Opinion, is on Amazon, and I should have another book coming out next year on being a empathetic hacker, cracking the code for cybersecurity leadership.
Oh, wow. Look forward to reading that one. That's good stuff. Well, Joshua, thanks for joining us. This was a real conversation, not a sanitized version. Thanks for listening to Automate or Die Trying. If this once hit, share with someone who's in the trenches trying to build something real. And if you're a leader with a story worth telling, reach out. We're always looking for the next conversation. Until next time, keep building.